Jai Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Gopi Janavalabha Girivardhari Yashoda Nandana Vraja Janaranjana Yamuna Tiravana Chari Yashoda Nandana Vraja Janaranjana Yamuna Tiravana Chari Jai Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Gopi Janavalabha Girivardhari Yashoda Nandana Braja Janaranjana Yamuna Tiravana Chari Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Keep an eye on this thing. It might walk away someday. Oh, I've got my iPad. Thank you. Yeah. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. This morning we'll hear from Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 3, Chapter 27, today text 18. Yathā gandhasya bhūmeścha na bhāvo vyatirekataḥ apāṁ rasasya cha yathā tathā buddheḥ parasya cha yathā gandhasya bhūmeścha na bhāvo vyatirekataḥ. Apāṁ rasasya cha yathā tathā buddheḥ parasya cha. Others, please. Yathā gandhasya bhūmeścha Vaishnavis. Gandhasya bhūmeś bhāvo vyatirekataḥ apāṁ rasasya yathā. Word to word. Yathā as gandhasya of aroma, bhūmeḥ of earth, cha and na no, bhāvaḥ existence, vyatirekataḥ separate, apāṁ of water, rasasya of taste, cha and yathā as, tathā so, buddheḥ of intelligence, parasya of consciousness, spirit, cha and. Translation and purport by His Divine Grace, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada. Oh, could I have this thing? As there's no separate existence of the earth and its aroma, or of water and its taste, thank you, there cannot be any separate existence of intelligence and consciousness. Responsively, please. As there's no separate existence of the earth and its aroma, or of water and its taste, there cannot be any separate existence of intelligence and consciousness. Srila Prabhupada's purport. The example is given here that anything material has an aroma. The flower, the earth, everything has an aroma. If the aroma is separated from the matter cannot be identified. If there's no taste to water, the water has no meaning. If there's no heat in the fire has no meaning. Similarly, when there is want of intelligence, spirit has no meaning. And I'm also going to read 19. Akartu karma bandho yang purushasya yudashaya guneshu satsu prakrite kaivalyam teshvatakatam. Hence, even though he is the passive performer of all activities, how can there be freedom for the soul as long as material nature acts on him and binds him? Srila Prabhupada's purport. Although the living entity desires freedom from the contamination of matter, he is not given release. Actually, as soon as the living entity puts himself under the control of the modes of material nature, his acts are influenced by the qualities of material nature, and he becomes passive. It is confirmed in the Bhagavad Gita, prakrite kriyaman anigunai. If the living entity acts according to the qualities or modes of material nature, he falsely thinks that he is acting. But unfortunately, he's passive. In other words, he has no opportunity to get out of the material nature because it has already conditioned him. In Bhagavad Gita, it is also stated that it is very difficult to get out of the clutches of material nature. One may try in different ways to think that everything is void in the ultimate issue and that there is no God, and that even if the background of everything is spirit, it's impersonal. This speculation may go on, but actually it is very difficult to get out of the clutches of material nature. Devahuti poses the question that although one may speculate in many ways, where is liberation as long as one is under the spell of material nature? The answer is also found in Bhagavad Gita. Only one who has surrendered himself unto the lotus feet of the Supreme Lord Krishna, Mam eva ye prapadyante, can be freed from the clutches of Maya. Since Devahuti is gradually coming to the point of surrender, her questions are very intelligent. How can one be liberated? How can one be in a pure state of spiritual existence as long as he's strongly held by the modes of material nature? This is also an indication to the false meditator. There are many so-called meditators who think, I am the spirit soul. I am conducting the activities of material nature. Under my direction, the sun is moving and the moon is rising. They think that by such contemplation or meditation, they can become free, but it is seen that just 3 minutes after finishing such nonsensical meditation, they are immediately captured by the modes of material nature. Immediately after his high-sounding meditation, a meditator becomes thirsty and wants to smoke or drink. He's under the strong grip of material nature, yet he thinks that he is already freed from the clutches of Maya. This question of Devahuti's is for such a person who falsely claims that he is everything, that ultimately everything is void, and that there are no sinful or pious activities. These are all atheistic inventions. Actually, unless a living entity surrenders unto the Supreme Personality of Godhead as instructed in the Bhagavad Gita, there's no liberation or freedom from the clutches of Maya. Om Jnana Timirantasya Jnananjana Shalakaya Chakshurun Militang Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Mukhaṁ Karoti Vachalam Pangum Langhayate Girim Yat Kripatamahang Bande Shri Gurun Dinataranam Shri Chaitanya Manobhishtam Stapitang Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Kadamahyam Dadati Swapadantikam Nama Om Vishnupadaya Krishna Preshtaya Bhutale Srimate Bhaktivedanta Swaminiti Namine Namaste Saraswati Deve Gauravani Pracharine Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Paschatide Shatarine Panchakalpatarubhyascha Kripa Sindhubhya Eva Chapatitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha Yathā gandhasya bhūmeś na bhāvo vyatirekataḥ apāṁ rasasya cha yathā tathā buddheḥ parasya. There's no separate existence of earth and its aroma, or of water and its taste. As there's no separate existence of the earth and its aroma, or of water and its taste, there cannot be any separate existence of intelligence and consciousness. Akartu karma bandho yam purushasya yudashraya guneshu satsu prakrite kaivalyam teshvatakatam. Hence, even though he's the passive performer of all activities, how can there be freedom for the soul as long as material nature acts on him and binds him? So we have a contrast here in these two verses, I think, work together. Intelligence should be inherent in consciousness or in spirit. In his Bhakti Sandarbha, Srila Jiva Goswami explains the nature of the jiva, rather an extended explanation. And he points out that the jiva is not just consciousness, but the jiva is capable of so much more. But intelligence or discrimination is actually what actually makes that consciousness active. It also explains that the jiva is very small. The Lord has three, broadly categorized three energies. His internal energy, which is bhakti, essentially. His external energy, which is stuff. This is, we see it as jada, or inert. It doesn't have volition, doesn't have its own will. This thing, except in maybe a Disney movie, can't get up and walk. Fortunately, neither can the harmonium. Otherwise, it may walk to Honolulu. Actually, we just got we were just given a very nice harmonium, so I just really like that harmonium. I was really happy. I came over yesterday, I was hoping to lead the kirtan at the Rajbogard tea, but Kibajaya was already on the job, and I was a little disappointed, although I got to hear that wonderful harmonium. So, and then there's us, the marginal energy. Our actual nature more closely resembles that of the internal energy. We're essentially identical with the internal energy. We're conscious. Not only do we exist, but we're conscious, and we're capable of joy. We're capable of love. And that distinguishes us from matter. But because we're small, it's possible for us to become overwhelmed by, well, whatever our environment is. We are called tathā shakti, and the tathā is that area on the shore of a body of water, a lake or a river or the ocean, that sometimes is covered by water and sometimes is exposed. I remember ever since I heard this from Srila Prabhupada back in 1969 or 70, I remembered that when I was being trained as an intelligence analyst in the Navy, we learned a word for that area of the shore. I think it's littoral zone, but when I actually looked it up and that was what was suggested, it just didn't click. But I still fiddle with that. 55 years later, I'm still kind of fiddling with it. But that's our nature. Sometimes we may identify with matter, sometimes with spirit. And it really depends on our association. Because we're associated with matter, we have a tendency to identify with that. So I think I'm an old white man. We had this wonderful program last night at an art gallery nearby with the Persian community, arranged by my friend Ashesha Gaurahari. And afterwards, these really wonderful, open-hearted, open-minded people shared with me their experience of the evening, and it was humbling and confusing. It was such nice things. And I was reflecting on the way back that my experience of myself, that I'm just a confused, goofy kid from Lompoc, California. And I was called on that. Well, wait a minute, how can you know better than that? And it's true. But because we are small, and we are very much inclined to being controlled by our environment. That's the meaning of tathā shakti. The example given in the Shastras is of a crystal ball, clear crystal ball. If we put it on a red cloth or in a red box, it's going to look red. If we put it in a green box, it'll look green. Blue, it'll look blue. That's our nature. We tend to be influenced by our environment, by our association. This is one reason parents look out for their kids. Who are they hanging out with? They're hanging out with the wrong kids. I remember when I was actually still a little boy. Of course, when you're 10 or 11, you don't think of yourself as a little boy anymore. The kids that I was hanging, this is in the late 50s, and we lived we lived in Canoga Park in the San Fernando Valley. And the late 50s, the coolest people in the movies were juvenile delinquents back then. Rebel Without a Cause and movies like that. And the easiest way to be a JD was to be in a gang, but there weren't any gangs in the San Fernando Valley for middle-class white boys who were in elementary school, so we made our own. So my parents sometimes worried about me. In middle of the 7th grade, my dad got a job on the East Coast in Washington, D.C., so we moved to Northern Virginia. And I often wondered, and I no longer have the opportunity to ask my folks about this, but I often wondered, did we move all the way across the country to get me away from my friends so that I didn't end up in prison or something? So this should be our concern, looking out for our association, because we're going to behave according to what we associate with. So now we're influenced by a certain mixture of the modes of material nature. And that largely determines what we're going to do. We do have choice, we do have volition, but it's limited because we're overwhelmed by that. And the only way to actually become free from that, we somehow or other, we think we can become free by our own efforts. So we might take to meditation or something like that. I'll come back to that in a minute. Srila Prabhupada has really interesting comments about that. But our experience is that the harder we try to get out by our own efforts, the more firmly we become entangled. Because our efforts simply aren't adequate. It's like being stuck in a pit of quicksand. I don't know about movies or TV shows today, but when we were kids, we'd see TV shows or movies where somebody would get stuck in quicksand and they'd try to get out, and as they're trying to get out, they sunk more and more deeply into the quicksand. The only way to get out of the quicksand is for someone who's actually free to give you a hand, extend a pole or something like that. So this is the situation with being stuck in the material nature. So we think that if we meditate, Srila Prabhupada's purports are full of references to people thinking they can become God by meditating. And here we have, I'm conducting the activities of material nature. The sun and the moon are rising and setting by my will. What a goof. Really. I mean, who really imagines that? Now, and I haven't met people. I know a lot of people who are meditators. A lot of my family members, including my brother and sister, have practiced meditation most of their adult lives. Buddhist meditation. My sister was into vipassana meditation for many years before she passed away. My brother's a Zen Buddhist teacher. But although it's kind of made their lives better in this world, it hasn't actually helped them to become free. Still, it's been a long time since I've met someone who thinks that by meditating, he imagines, or she imagines, that they're making the sun and the moon rise and set. There were such folks. There were other things that involved, I think, along with the meditation, certain chemical substances. But this is quite a delusion to think that I'm all powerful. I remember once, a long time ago, shortly after I got married, my former wife and I were living in San Diego, and I was taking the bus from downtown San Diego up to our apartment, which was just down Fifth Avenue, a little ways from where the temple was then. And some guy, some unhoused guy, as we say today, approached me on the bus and asked to bum a cigarette. And I said, well, I don't smoke. And the guy looked at me and he says, I'm God. I need a cigarette. And I looked at him and I said, are you listening to yourself, sir? I mean, you're God, you need a cigarette, and you're begging a cigarette from some dumb 26-year-old kid like me. And I don't even have one. I mean, what's your, anyway. So these things really are going on. And they simply make us more firmly stuck, more firmly under the control of the modes of material nature. And quite often, more and more, under the mode of ignorance, the mode of darkness than anything else. How do we actually get out? Well, Krishna says, "Mameva ye prapadyante, mayametam tara." He says this material nature is very difficult to overcome, only by taking shelter of me, because it's my nature. I'm the actual controller of material nature. If you take shelter of me, you'll be cool. Just like when you're a little kid, you might be a little worried about maybe being in the big city. I grew up, before we moved to the San Fernando Valley, I lived, as I mentioned, in Lompoc, which back then was like 6,000 people. And, when we would come to Los Angeles or even go to Santa Barbara, which I considered the big city, you're walking down the sidewalk, there's a lot of people, you're holding on to mom's hand or dad's hand. Then you feel safe. Otherwise, it could be a little scary. It's really easy to be overwhelmed, and you get the sense that you're very small, and you could be swept away by anything. So how do we actually become free? Well, there's actually the actual process of yoga, which is meant to instruct us in genuine meditation, meditation on the super soul, and bring us ultimately to the point of Ishvara Pranidhana, which is surrendering to the Supreme Controller. But where do we get yoga, especially bhakti yoga? We're only going to get that from those who carry it in their hearts. So when we see, especially in the 11th canto of the Bhagavatam, there's where King Nimi is asking essential questions of the Navayogendras, these 9 sons of King Rishabhadev. He's out on pilgrimage, and he encounters these sages, and he's asking questions. And he's asking, how can a foolish person like me actually become free from the clutches of material nature? And I think it's Prabhupada explains the whole range of experience in the material world and how it's all ultimately frustrating. So he starts with sex. Sex entangles us. We identify in such a way and we get really stuck in this way. And then he says, okay, how about wealth? Well, that causes more pain than pleasure in the long run. When I was young, one of the richest men in the world was a man named Howard Hughes. Howard Hughes owned an aircraft company. He owned a movie studio, which essentially meant he owned some of the most beautiful women in the world. He had free access to some of the most beautiful women in the world. Very powerful man, probably the envy of so many folks. But when he got older, apparently his awareness that he was actually going to lose all of that became progressively acute, and he went nuts. He completely lost his mind. Anyone who had any association with him in his later years, would tell you. I mean, the guy, he was afraid of people. He was afraid of germs. I think he didn't cut his nails. He was just kind of completely losing it. All that wealth might have given him little bursts of pleasure here and there, but it didn't give him real happiness, and it certainly didn't free him from the clutches of material nature. Okay, so wealth's a problem. How about svarga? Can I go to heaven, live forever, have all the apsaras, all the the beautiful babes that make Aishwarya Rai or whoever we have in this world look like, as Srila Prabhupada says, like frogs by comparison? Well, even there, you're going to worry about somebody trying to get your spot. Indra's always getting in trouble because of this. And he's the king of heaven. And he's always, and it happens sometimes. Sometimes he becomes displaced by the asuras. So they're always worried about some rival. And then eventually, Chine punya martyalokam vishanti. That when the pious credit wears out, you got to come back here and deal with all this nonsense. The short life, creaky joints, fading memory, all the stuff that goes with living in this martyaloka, this world of death. So what's the solution? He says, tasmad gurum prapadyeta. Therefore, when someone is seen through the scam of the material world, tasmad gurum prapadyeta jigyasu shaya utamat shabde parecha nishnatam brahman upashama ashaya. That we have to take shelter. When we see, then, once we actually understand the precarious nature of our life in this world, and that it's never really going to satisfy us, then it's time for us to take shelter of a spiritual master. And we see in the Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu that this is the beginning of spiritual life. When in the second chapter, Srila Rupa Goswami lists, before he starts listing the 64 main practices of sadhana bhakti. Well, first he talks about who's eligible for bhakti. Anyone remember who's eligible for bhakti? All human beings. He says, all human beings, or he cites a verse saying, all human beings are eligible for bhakti, just as all human beings are eligible to take bath in the Ganga in the month of Magh. Anybody can, anyone can do it. And then he talks about different levels of qualification. And then he gets into the 64 angas of bhakti. And the first 10 are called vidhi, or rules. We can read them as dues. And the second 10 are nishedhas, or prohibitions, don'ts. And he lists these. And then at the end of that list of 20 items, he says, these 20 items constitute the entrance to the temple of bhakti. This is the threshold to bhakti. In other words, if we don't, at least to some degree, adopt these 20 items, then there's no real access, no full access to the others. And then he says, and of these, the first 3 are essential. They're particularly important. What are those first 3? They all have to do with taking shelter of the spiritual master. Sri Guru Parasya. Taking shelter of the lotus feet of a spiritual master. Approaching a spiritual master and saying, Shishyasteham sadhimam tvam prapannam. I'm your disciple. I am your student. You are my teacher. I take shelter of you. And then, diksha shikshadi, accepting initiation and instruction from the spiritual master. And the third, vishrambhena guror seva, rendering service to the spiritual master with vishrambha, real interesting word. Srila Prabhupada often translates it as awe and reverence, which is really interesting. That would be gaurava, which is also necessary in the relationship with the spiritual master. But vishrambha means intimacy, it means confidence, it means trust. What kind of intimacy? It's a word that's used to describe Krishna's cowherd boyfriends in Vrindavan. And so how close is that intimacy? they identify so closely with Krishna sometimes that they even identify with his clothes. He's one of us. He's our buddy. Some of us get to beat him up sometimes. Sometimes he beats us up, and sometimes we beat him up. Sometimes we play a game and we have to carry him on our shoulders. Sometimes he loses and has to carry it. And, when we're having lunch, sometimes we play keep away with one of the boys' lunch, including Krishna's. Krishna, because Prabhupada explained this a number of times, because his parents are the king and queen of Vrindavan, his lunch is always the nicest, the most opulent. He has the puris and kachoris and laddus and halava and sweet rice. They have rice dal and chapatis and sabji. And sometimes one of the boys will take a bite out of something and it's really good. And they'll say, hey, Krishna, check this out. And Krishna will take a bite out of their chapati or laddu or whatever it is. This is Vishrambha. There should be some sense of intimacy. Now, the intimacy with the guru doesn't necessarily mean you identify as his or her buddy. That's inappropriate. The sense of intimacy is that you are able to understand the guru's needs, able to anticipate the guru's needs. Prabhupada talked about this with regard to service. First-class services, you understand what needs to be done, and you can do it without being asked. Second-class service, you do what you're asked. Third-class service, maybe you'll get around to it. So this kind of Vishrambha, and it's this kind of connection, because it constitutes a direct connection with the Lord. It's tantamount to a direct connection with the Lord. Sakshadhari tvena samasta shastra uktastata bhavyata eva shadbhe, we sing every morning. That is how we become free. All these other things, they simply don't work. They'll not only fail us, but they'll fool us as well. Okay, having gone way over time already, I'm going to stop here and entertain any discussion. Brigupati Prabhu?
His acts are influenced by the qualities of material nature, and he becomes passive.
Oh.
Yeah, he doesn't say almost passive, he says passive. So how does somebody whose mind is completely controlled make the choice, the decision to surrender? It seems like a contradiction to me. Either, if you're controlled, you're controlled. If you're not, it doesn't say almost passive or almost controlled. It says passive.
Well, my experience that happens only by the influence of that superior energy. When that Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur explains in his Madhurya Kadambini how bhakti works through the 9 different stages that Srila Rupa Goswami describes in the Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu. But before he does that, he establishes Krishna's absolute independence. And he does that in order to make the point that bhakti is every bit as independent as Krishna. She can go wherever she likes. And then he explains how she does it. She takes shelter in the heart of those devotees who've accepted her from other devotees. And when, as Madhyama Bhaktas, they have the proper discrimination how to behave, they understand who is God, who's the absolute truth, who are devotees, who are innocent, and who are inimical, and they behave accordingly. They love God, they make friends with the devotees, they're kind to the innocent, those who haven't yet received bhakti, and they just don't have any time. They neglect those who are inimical. And wherever they show their mercy, Bhakti Devi follows. And bhakti is the most powerful force. Jiva Goswami, in this section of Madhurya Kadambini, Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur cites a verse that Jiva Goswami cites in his Priti Sandarbha from something called Matara Shruti. Now, I haven't figured out yet what the Matara Shruti is. I haven't found anything that actually points me there yet. But the fact that it has Shruti in its title makes me think it's a Vedic, some Vedic text. And it says, Only bhakti has the power to show us Krishna. Only bhakti has the power to bring us near to Krishna. Only bhakti has the power to control Krishna. Therefore, bhakti is the most powerful thing of all. So once bhakti enters our heart, it's pretty much game over. It's just wherever you set the toaster to decide how long until you're done. So it's only going to happen when there is this influence from outside. And therefore, what do we see in Sri Chaitanya Charitamrita? Brahmanda Brahmite Kona Bhagavana Jeev, Guru Krishna Prasade Pai Bhakti Lata Beach. By the grace of Krishna and the Lord, only by the grace of Krishna and the Lord do we get that seed, that little tiny seed. It's like a tulsi seed. They're so tiny. For the vine of bhakti that ultimately is meant to grow and embrace Krishna's lotus feet and bear the fruits of love of God. And that's after wandering throughout the cosmos, not just from one body to another, but from one universe to another, since beyond time. And so the Bhagavatam describes such persons as ati bhagya, extremely fortunate. Ati there is, in this case, it's an intensifier, and it means excessive, too much. So they're too much lucky, too fortunate. It's not really dumb luck, but practically speaking, it is. I mean, who can account for some, character who's trying to become a fish, actually not a fish, a dolphin or a seal, surfing all, as I was mentioning the other day, I was literally dragged out of the ocean by the devotees, pretty much. How does he get the determination? And somewhere, Srila Jiva Goswami describes that bhakti lata, bija, the seed, as the determination to practice. How does that enter my life? Because I'm determined to be miserable. It's just divine grace. I heard from two leaders back in the early 70s to whom Srila Prabhupada described this, our situation independently. I heard this independently from Karandhar and Gorsundar. That when we become involved in cow slaughter, however we become involved in cow slaughter, the sin is so great that for each cow that we've killed or partaken of, we have to take birth for as many lives as there are hairs on that cow's body. Cows are big animals and there's a lot of hair. And therefore the only possibility of release is by divine grace. So somehow or other there has to be the influence of that internal energy. So one night in May of 1969, I went to a Jimi Hendrix concert. But the devotees there, and they were the thing that was really happening that night. Just seems like dumb luck, but it's divine grace. Does that help? It's a start. Anything else? Yes, sir.
Hare Krishna Rama.
Hare Rama.
Thank you for such a wonderful class. You mentioned bhakti in your answer just a little while ago. Can you define bhakti for me, please?
Well, the easy answer, the facile answer is loving devotion. But it also is the essence of Krishna's internal energy and is identified with Srimati Radharani because she's the one who actually has the power to control Krishna. There are 6, in the first chapter of Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu, 6 attributes of pure devotional service are discussed. The last one is Sri Krishna Karshani. Krishna means all attractive. But bhakti is so powerful that it attracts even that person who's all attractive. Sri Krishna Karshani. And this Srila Jiva Goswami, although in his commentary in the Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu, Srila Jiva Goswami says, when we're talking about Sri Krishna Karshani, obviously we're talking about sadhya bhakti, or accomplished, perfected bhakti. But in his Bhakti Sandarbha, he actually has an extended argument based on 6 or 7 verses from the 2nd chapter of the Bhagavatam, showing how even in the stage of sadhana bhakti, there's some power to control Krishna. And he shows how each of these verses, out of this 7 verses, I think 6.5 of them, or maybe it's 6 verses and 5.5 of them, all are talking about sadhana bhakti. And half a verse is talking about sadhya bhakti, so bhāva or prema bhakti. And they all show that there's some power to control the Lord. And he says, otherwise, how would the Lord end up giving bhakti to that person if bhakti doesn't have some power to control? Sometimes we hear Srimati Radharani, she'll bring some girls to Krishna and say, you should engage these girls. So bhakti is that force of love that actually is able to control Krishna, ultimately. So what power, if it can control Krishna, what power do we have? What power do my piddling material desires have? What power does my material conditioning have? It may take some time, but compared to the time that I've actually spent drowning in the ocean of material existence, it's a blink of an eye. And then forgotten. This experience isn't part of our deal in the spiritual world. Is that okay? Anything else? Thank you so much for your patience. Grantaraja Srimad Bhagavatam ki jai. Gaura Bhakta Vrinda ki jai.
So much. I was listening from the back. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you for the kind words.
So if you don't get the contact, you don't get out. Just like if you're in quicksand, unless somebody comes and rescues you,